is I've been interested in questions of globalization and immigration for a long time and have looked at them in a number of contexts. I've taught a great deal of business ethics over the years, and many of these topics come together in business ethics. The immediate reason for putting the ideas together, about a year ago, the university sponsored a forum on the Catholic Bishop's Letter on Economic Justice for its 25th anniversary. And one of my colleagues who teaches in core with me, Una Cadigan, said that humanities students needed to know about economics. So I took a couple of deep gulps and said, okay, I'll put together a presentation for the first year core students on the shape of globalization right now to give at the tail end of the year. So I did that lecture, which then I refined and worked on for the Salon presentation. John Dewey, American philosopher, said, and this is a paraphrase, that the question in most endeavors is, what kind of a person are you making? What kind of a world are you making? And so what I want to do here is draw a picture of what kind of a world we live in, we contribute to, and we are preparing our students for. And taking a look at that, what that world is in particular ways, how can that help us think about how better to address our students and their needs? Now, the topics I'm bringing together: literature on global cities, literature on transnationalization of labor, immigration for labor, economic inequalities, and then ask the question, in a globalized world, what does it mean to be local? So 4 different bodies of ideas put together. Now, I suppose this is an academic disability, but I feel like if we're talking about globalization, I have to have a definition. And we could spend all year talking about theories of globalization and how to define it. So I just kind of picked one. This is taken from A.T. Kearney, that's a global consulting firm who puts together a global cities index that I'll refer to in a bit. This is their definition, but at least it brings out themes that I think are important. Globalization, increasing integration of economies, societies, and cultures from around the world. It's about the denationalization of economics and culture, a transfer of power and influence from nation states to global markets. Okay, so that's one change, from a nation state grid to a global kind of pattern. It's a process driven by technology, very important, and is symbolized by movement. It's also about speed. And all of those factors will come together as we talk. I like this map because there are no nation-state lines. There are cities. And Saskia Sassen, one of the leading, she's a sociologist from Columbia University, one of the leading scholars studying global cities, says if we're going to talk about where globalization takes place, there need to be headquarters, there need to be fiber optic cables, all of the infrastructure for running this, she says, basically forms a grid pattern. And if you want to see how it's organized, look at the cities. And so look at the networks set up among the top global cities. It's a better answer, I think, than globalization happens everywhere, which it does, but it's patterned. This is taken from the consulting firm index of the top global cities. And what you see here is the top ones: New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Los Angeles, Chicago, and on it goes on down. Shanghai is 21. It sort of got cut off there. It keeps on going, but this is as many as I wanted to talk about. Having these features close together in one place, you get enormous interaction and enormous capabilities of connection to other parts of the globe. Often these cities are much more connected to other global cities than to the particular region or nation state where they happen to be located. Also looking at emerging cities, you may be asking, what about all those enormous Chinese cities that keep springing up? Well, you'll see a lot of them here. Here what they do is Kearney only looks at human capital and business activity, figuring the others will come, and charts these. Here we have strengths from high to low, vulnerabilities from high over to low. And the way they're defining that: strengths, presence of infrastructure, ease of doing business, GDP, growth of the middle class; vulnerabilities, things like political instability, whether healthcare is available, degree of corruption, pollution levels, and things of the sort. But it's interesting, if you look in the high potential, all of the cities there except for Bogota are Asian. and many of them are Chinese. And so come back in 3 or 4 years and we'll see where the top 10 global cities are. It may have shifted. Now, unless I missed something, among the vulnerable, all of these cities in Africa that are on the chart are in the vulnerable quadrant. So again, interesting connections here. Well, what does a global city look like? What you find is basically cities that are becoming increasingly bifurcated between the elites or the super elites and those who service them. Who are these super elites? Well, they are folks who earn a great deal of money, who keep the grid of the global cities going, who keep international trade going, and they want to live in a way that's commensurate with the kinds of work they do and the income they have. Now, these super elites need to be serviced. They need people to clean the hotels, to clean their homes, to clean their office buildings, to walk their children to school, to walk their dogs around the block, to pick up the dry cleaning, to prepare their gourmet food, to act as security guards, to do the gentrification work that is needed here, and increasingly to fly their helicopters as they hop from building top to building top. Who does this? Who services them? Generally, low-wage workers. Increasingly, no, not us, not us. We have us on another chart. Increasingly, they are temporary workers, contract workers, and increasingly, they are immigrants, persons of color, and increasingly female. We're going to talk a bit about international immigration. And the point I'm making here is while people decide themselves, make personal decisions about whether to immigrate or not, the immigration taken from the broad view is patterned. It falls into certain types of patterns, and so these are constraints within which people make personal decisions. This map on the top is scaled to indicate immigration flows and to show again that the flows are patterned. The United States balloons out enormously, as does Europe. India just about disappears. China is deflated. And here we have the Arabian Peninsula, which is also enormous. I have some statistics on that. Now, this map doesn't indicate everything. And one thing that I think is missing, it doesn't indicate internal migration. And what you have in China is enormous migration from the rural areas to the cities. And so some things are left out here. Give you a sense of the numbers. And again, you see that the United States gets far more than any other nation state. This is interesting. Countries with the highest percentage. Qatar. Has anyone been to Qatar? Qatar. Some say Qatar, some say Qatar. I haven't, but 87% of the population are foreign-born. Look at Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Oman at the bottom. The oil industry is basically, the workers are basically immigrants. They come from elsewhere and do the work there. This is a chart of global inequality. This is income. The bar across the top holding steady US per capita income from 1950 up to 2005. And what you see across the bottom, these lines, let's see, these two lines, Africa and India. China is starting to rise a bit. This is Latin America. This is former Soviet independent states. Japan, Western Europe, the United States up at the top. I imagine the China line will change. We'll see where that goes. But again, you see the enormous disparities. You think about all of this, about growing inequality, about international immigration. And I haven't talked here about what happens to the local population when the immigrants come in. Well, let's think about that. This is Zygmunt Bauman. He is a Polish sociologist, and talking about the advantages of immigrants as flexible labor to large corporations or the contractors who contract to bring the folks in. And again, the point is what you get are pure laborers. You get folks who do not bring their children, who do not bring their elderly parents, who do not need extensive medical care because you send them back. They don't need to be educated on site. You don't need school systems to provide for them. And so they are the closest to pure labor as you can get, highly desirable. And think about a community is spatially located. And a community, at least the way I usually think of a community, is a place where there are lots of people who are enormously vulnerable, like all of us right after we're born, and all of us when we are very old or very sick or disabled. And those folks need care, and they need an infrastructure, and they need to grow, and they need education, and they need care, and they need all of these things as part of a spatial location. When you're talking about a multinational corporation, the owners are the investors who may have absolutely no spatial relationship to the company. They often are not employed by the company. They often don't even live where the company has headquarters or branches. They can make decisions and not at all suffer the consequences to the community of closing factories, of setting up here, of setting down there, of bringing in labor. Shedding the responsibility for the consequences of one's decisions is the most coveted and cherished gain which the new mobility brings to free-floating, locally unbound capital. He's describing a sense of what this new global city, global elite network is and what it means. Being local in a global world is a sign of social deprivation and degradation. What does it mean to be local? Well, I can't stop there. So I have a couple of examples, and I hope you folks have lots more, and perhaps some local ones, Dayton ones, these are not Dayton ones, of experiments that folks are trying. So in Cleveland, you have Case Western Reserve, the Cleveland Clinic, the VA Center, and some others, surrounded by a territory that has been just devastated by the economic conditions, lots of foreclosures, and so on. And so some groups are setting up cooperative industries. These are for-profit businesses owned by the employees. They employ people from the immediate neighborhood and run it as a cooperative. One of the first they did was a laundry. After all, you buy a hospital, there are lots of dirty sheets, and they need to be washed real often. And so they're trying to get state-of-the-art green technology to use in the laundry business. They've started an energy solutions enterprise where they design and install solar panels. And then a third, hydroponic gardens. They have a many-acre plot that they have turned into basically a vast greenhouse. And it's local produce both for the neighborhood and for the hospitals, for the university there. So there are experiments, and I don't want to overlook that. But then the question becomes, what's the meaning of those in light of the other features that I've discussed? So, what has been swirling around in your minds, and please, those of you who know more about each of these matters than I do, throw in what you have. But how do we think about the shape of the global world, and how do we think about what the local means in that context? It was particularly interesting to know some of the people who were making comments and to be able to connect what they said with what they do on an everyday basis. One interesting exchange, I talked quite a bit about international labor, and many people immigrate in order to take jobs. And some people talked about how these were opportunities to earn more money than they could in their country of origin, and also how it gave them chances to travel internationally and so on. Some of the folks from the English as a Second Language program who work with immigrants all the time talked about the emotional and medical difficulties that many immigrants have in terms of dealing with such an overwhelming situation, particularly being separated geographically from their families.